In today's video, I'm going to talk to you about different binding options for your quilt projects. Hi, I'm Jamieson-Hirst of Chatterbox Quilts, and there are lots of different ways you can finish the edges of your quilt projects, and I wanted to give you some of those alternatives today so that you can explore some of those if you haven't tried some of them. So, first off, we have the traditional binding method. That is when you have binding that you put on the front of your quilt and you pull it around to the back and you hand stitch it down, like I've done in this particular project. This is actually called Diamond Bright, this quilt, and it is a project we've made in the Quilter's Way. So you can't see the stitches here very well, which is what you want actually, but I have hand stitched the binding all down here to the back of this particular quilt. So those stitches should be pretty much invisible and they should be close together to hold everything in place, right? Okay, so we're all familiar with that technique, I think. Now let's talk about another one, and that is machine binding. And if I can get Salem to let me show you, we'll move this over here. There you go, Salem. And I have this quilt here. Now this is one of my recent projects called Creative Directions. It's a project that I made as an Island Batik ambassador. And because I have a deadline on these projects, I didn't really have the time to do the hand binding like I normally would. So instead I did machine binding, which is done with your sewing machine. There are different ways to do this. I do mine a little differently than some people. Watch until the end of the video. I'm going to give you a little bit more information about that. So in this particular case, I have again put it on the front, put the binding on the front, rolled it around to the back, but instead of stitching on the back, I have stitched with the machine all along in the ditch here on the front, and that catches the binding on the back. So that's another way you can do your binding, is by sewing machine, and that's a quicker method, although I would recommend that you take your time doing it to get exactly the results you want, especially in those corners, right? Okay, you may not want to bind at all. I'll tell you, I don't really like doing binding. I mean, I love the result it gets, but if I can avoid it, I do. I'll be honest with you. And so I like to do the pillowcase method. So what that is where you will take a project, typically a smaller project, wall hanging, mug rug, those types of things, and you will actually not add a binding. Okay, so you can see in this particular example that the borders go right out to the edges. And then you can see when I flip around the backing goes right at the edge too. So there is no binding along here. Now don't worry, if you don't know how to do the pillowcase method or some of these other methods I'm talking about, you can check up above or in the description below for links to videos on how to do these different techniques. So this is a technique that I would not recommend on a big quilt, but on a smaller project, it works very well and you don't have to do the binding. All right. There is another method you can use as well, and this works again well for small projects, art quilts, things you probably aren't going to wash. I mean, you could if you wanted to, but this is a facing. So again, if you look at the front of this project, this is a little wall hanging. There's no binding along here. My border runs right to the edge, and when I flip it over, you can see that I've got some other fabric here. I've got some corner triangles to hang it up, so I'll just flip them out of the way. So you can see I've got these facing strips that are put on all four sides, and they are just stitched down and rolled over, and then you can either sew them down by hand, you can glue them, there's different things you can do. Again, I've got a video on how to do this, so I'm not going to get into all those details right now. But if you want to have a project where you don't see that binding, you want the border or the center part, the fabric, just to run to the edges, facing may be a great technique for you to use. Now, I mentioned about the machine binding earlier that I had done on the Creative Directions quilt. So you may be wondering how to do that particular technique. And I don't want you to worry about that because I have a video on it. Check out this video here. It'll give you all the information you need to try that technique on your own projects. For more helpful quilting information, please go to my website at www.chatterboxquilts.com.